Welcome YouTubers for another edition of the lightest and best knife reviews where we review companies and their lightest offerings. Today we're going to be reviewing the Rockstead company and their lightest offering is the Hizen. Rockstead is based in Sakai, Japan, and it's a company that makes blades with 0-degree grinds and mirror polished convex edges. The Hizen is their lightest and smallest offering and is completely beautiful, as you can see. First of all, let's go over some specifications. The blade length is 2 7/8 inches. The handle length is 4 1/8 inch, giving the total knife length 7 inches. The weight is a svelte 2.4 ounces. And we have some other knives to compare it against. First, the Strider PT Lego. The PT Lego is a little bit smaller. We have the Chris Reeve in Cosi, which is a similar blade length, but the handle is a little smaller. We have the Hinder XM18 3-inch blade. The blade is a little longer, as is the handle. We have the Benchmade Mini Griptilian, which is a little smaller than this knife. We have a Spyderco, which is Delica, which is approximately the same size. Maybe the handle's a little bit longer. And last but not least, we have the Hinder Half Track, which is a little bit smaller than this knife. The blade of this knife is made of ZDP 187 and has a Rockwell hardness of around 67. Spyderco also uses ZDP 189, but their Rockwell hardness only gets to 65. The interesting thing about this knife is that it comes in a balsa wood case, but each knife has its own spec sheets and each knife is individually tested. This knife, it has its individual Rockwell hardness testing at 66.7 and its serial number is 371. On the lock bar side, at the base of the blade, behind the plunge grind, you'll note a little dimple. And that little dimple is where the Rockwell hardness machine tested the hardness of each specific blade. So whenever you get your birth certificate on the knife, the Rockwell hardness is specific to your specific blade. The knife has jimping, but it doesn't have very good traction, nor is there a thumb ramp to leverage your finger against. The spine has swedging and a fuller with a hole in it on the flats. The grind is a convex grind. The blade is a drop point blade. There's an external stop pin against which the blade tang rests. Note that the blade tang is flat with a rounded floating stop pin between the scales. It doesn't have any external openings. And other knife companies choose to do this a little better, I think. Here is the Browse blade knife, for example, and as you can tell, there is a cupping on the blade tang, so when the force of the blade hits against the stop pin, it's diffused over a larger surface area. The pivots on the knife are run on phosphobronze washer, much like the Chris Reeve knives. The deployment method is with a bilateral thumb stud. The beautiful thing about these thumb studs, as you can see, is they protrude a little beyond the handle scales. So whenever you deploy the knife, it's easy to get a purchase on the thumb stud. The lock is a frame lock with a steel insert. As you can tell, the lockup is at about 60 degrees, and there's no lock stick and no blade rock, either vertically or laterally. The detent angle, the angle at which after you release the lock bar and encounter the detent ball, is around 5 degrees. So that's pretty good. The handle scales are made out of A7075 hard anodized duraluminum. The handle scale pattern resembles the sand in a Japanese Zen garden and is very calming. The show side scale has a cutout which allows easy access to the lock bar, and whenever you grip the knife is a place that your index finger can rest. The knife has a flow-through construction with only 2 points of connection, the pivot and one posterior standoff. And as I've mentioned, there's also a free floating stop pin. I love the simplicity of this design. It reminds me of another great design, which is the Chris Reeve Incosi. The Incosi has a stop pin, one standoff, and the pivot. And those are the only points of attachment. There are many similarities between the Chris Reeve Incosi and the Rockstead Hizen. They both have sub 3-inch blades. They both have construction of flow-through pillar design with 2 attachment points, the pivot, and one standoff with a free-floating backspacer. They both have lock bars. They both have spring clips that are embedded and held by only one screw. The Chris Reeve knife has a titanium clip. The Rockstead has a steel clip. And they both function very nicely. The ergonomics on the Hizen are very good. As I mentioned, they have a cutout for your index finger, and your other fingers fit nicely for a good 4-finger grip. The pocket clip, as I've mentioned, is an embedded spring clip, which is right hand only, tip up carry only. The show side is just for beauty. The warranty on the Hizen is distinctive in that Rockstead will sharpen the knife for you for free. You only have to mail it to Japan. What are my impressions about the knife? There are opportunities for improvement. The jimping on the posterior spine could be improved for better traction. The blade tang could be cupped instead of flat at the stop pin interface. It would have been okay with me to leave the Made in Japan off of the pocket clip. I understand Japanese people have pride in their manufacturing process, much like people in the United States, but the words look stamped on and cheap, unlike the maker's mark on the blade, which uses a more sophisticated font and looks laser etched. And then there is the biggest disadvantage, which is the blade is the sharpest possible, but it's a convex blade with a very hard steel, which means that you have to ship it off to Japan even though it is free. It's inconvenient. What do I like about the blade? I like its simplicity. I like that the knife has only 2 connection points, the pivot and the standoff with a floating stop pin. I like that the scales are monochromatic and have a flowing Zen garden sand aesthetic. I find it very calming. I like the pocket clip. It's simple, it's unpretentious, it's a steel spring clip that can be held firmly with only one screw because it's embedded rather than surface mounted. And I like the blade. It's a convex ground, mirror polished ZDP 189 worked to a Rockwell hardness of 67, which few knives can attain. This blade is the sharpest blade I own, and I own a lot of knives. And it begs the question, what is the purpose of a knife? If you ask 10 knife guys that question, you'd probably get 12 different answers. But if you want the sharpest knife possible with the hardest steel available and a handle that's both beautiful and simple, get a Rockstead Hizen.